This is Daniel Wessler Riordan, and I'm reading the short story Drieve Elsewhere, which was originally published in Caketrain. And for disambiguation purposes, I'm going to dedicate this to Sarah Pierce, who is not the Sarah of this story. In fact, I had not met her when I wrote this story, so let that be known forevermore. She can't stop laughing, and it's not a small giggle or a stifled chuckle, but a full-on guffaw, like she might laugh out her guts right under my shirt, like her teeth might fall out of her head. "I'm dying, Sarah," I say to her. "I'm barely 35 and I'm dying." "Henry, it's all just so," she says. And then she says it again. "It's all just so." "Just so what?" I ask. And she keeps going, peals of laughter. She laughs and laughs and laughs until she starts choking. She excuses herself to the bathroom. She closes the door and I can still hear her behind it. I turn the knob and it's locked. "I need a moment," she says between laughs. "I just need to collect myself." But the laughter just gets stronger, louder. "A few weeks back my feet started to get sore, which I had attributed to the new pair of shoes I'd purchased. No arch support, I said to myself, giving each foot a squeeze, sitting on the couch after a hard day at the office. "They need to be broken in," I said. And then I asked Sarah, "Maybe you could give my tootsies a quick rub, dear?" And Sarah looked at my face, and then at my feet, and then at my face, and then her magazine, and said, "Why don't you buy some inserts?" "Yes," I said, and so I did, but that didn't fix the problem. A few days after my feet started hurting, it was my legs. A deep throbbing in my bones, up to my knees the first day, and then up into my hips the following. I could barely walk. I stepped outside to take in some air, and the pain lurched inside me, became vibrant. After the legs came the torso, and onward until my shoulders and arms pulsed hurricane waves. I began to bloat. I seeped. I covered my body with mesh bandages to soak up the nebulous issuance from every pore. I began to smell of turned milk. My eyes began to crust over. I called the nurse's hotline. She told me she'd heard tell of such symptoms. "Soak in a tub full of hot vinegar," she said. I did, but nothing changed other than my odor. I pried my eyes open with the sharp end of a nail file. I dressed myself, groaning. "Sarah, I'm falling apart, my love. I'm falling apart." "What isn't falling apart?" she asked me. "Seriously, Henry, look around you. What isn't falling apart?" I knuckled some plaque from around my eyes. I sneezed and something flew out of me. I couldn't identify it. "Christ, Henry," Sarah said, "get a hold of yourself." I grabbed a paper towel from the kitchen and blotted off. A few days later I went to the doctor's office. After one look at me, he double-gloved his hands and banded a mask to his face. He inspected my ears and listened to my chest and back and asked me to breathe deep, and I said I was breathing deep. And he made a knowing but inscrutable sound. He swabbed my throat and then placed the sample in a bag marked hazardous. "I need to run a few tests," he said. He left the room and I could hear the sound of the door locking behind him. When he came back, he looked quite serious and said the good news was I wasn't contagious, but the bad news was I wasn't going to make it. "Make what?" I asked. "It," he said. "You're dying." I asked him why. "Philosophy isn't really in my wheelhouse," he said. His face perked up a bit, and he said he'd only read of such a disease, and that I was really quite a miracle, that I had a better chance of getting struck by lightning than contracting this condition. "How long do I have?" I asked, and he looked down at his watch. "Well, is there anything I should do?" I asked. "I don't know," he said. "There's not much to do but sit around and wait for the end. I wouldn't plan any activities that require much movement. Go to a movie, maybe." I started crying, the salt in my tears stinging the welts on my face, and he asked me to stop. "Do you know how many patients I've lost?" he asked, and I shook my head. "No," through choked sobs. "Quite a fair few," he answered. "And really, it's starting to get to me. A man in my position can't afford to go around with death on his mind. You understand. So if you could, for me, Please. Drieve Elsewhere? Yes? I nodded my head and attempted to pull myself together. He raised his hand to shake mine, and I reciprocated. But as I swung my hand to reach his, the skin on my right pinky and right finger sloughed off and plopped to the tile floor. The doctor and I shared a brief stare at my naked skeletal digits. I began to sob again, and he shuffled me out the door. "And no crying in the waiting room either," he called after me. "Think of the other patients." Sarah finally comes out of the bathroom, and there are tears streaking her cheeks, a smile on her face. "I figured it out," she says. "Why it is I'm laughing." "Yes," I say. "Because," she says, "you managed to figure out the one way you could be more selfish. You used up all the other ways, and now you figured you'd do this." And she laughs and laughs and laughs. "Of course you're dying. You really do amaze me, Henry. You really do." I feel a strange draft, and I lift my pant leg and discover that the skin from my knee down has pooled around my left ankle like a loose sock. "See?" I say to her, and she says, "Oh, Henry, it's all just so. It's all just so." I run my fingers through my hair, and it falls out in clumps in my hand. "I need to call the boss," I say, to her, or maybe no one in particular, to tell him I won't be coming in anymore. I get the boss on the horn, and he says, "What do you mean?" And I repeat myself a little more slowly, and he asks if I'm speaking metaphorically, and I say no, and he tells me how horrible it all is, and he's so sorry, and he'll have to get in touch with accounting for the exact amount I owe the company for terminating my contract prematurely. But to be prepared, it'll be sizable, as I've always been his best salesman. I hand the phone to my wife and say, "It's for you," then drag my body away. Barely considering why, I stumble toward my neighbor Sandy's house. Sandy is a dull-eyed deadbeat of a man whose wife left him long ago and has been living on his aging mother's largesse since before I've known him. His chocolate lab, Mortimer, who usually doesn't give me so much as a polite sniff when I come around, is now charging right for me. His head snaps back as he reaches the end of his chain and his body flips out from under him. Knowing that I'd never make it past him at my current pace, I crack off my left hand and toss it to him, then ooze my way up to Sandy's front door. Sandy ushers me in and helps me into a large, firm-backed chair in the living room. "Goodness," he says. "What's going on with you?" "I'm dying, Sandy," I say. "Obviously," Sandy says. "And goodness," he says, gently plucking my loosened ear from the side of my head and placing it in an ashtray. "You have shit just falling off of you. Can I get you a drink?" "It's a bit early for me," I say. He fixes a tumbler for himself and returns to my side. "Sandy," I say, "I'm terrified. I don't want to die." Sandy takes a drink and nods, then gets up and urges me out of my chair. "Come with me," he says. "I want to show you something." I leave a sticky residue and assorted bits of myself on the upholstery. I apologize, and he tells me to think nothing of it. I follow him down the hallway to his mother's bedroom door. I haven't seen her in months and months. He opens the door a crack. His mother is lying there, staring at the ceiling. I see flashing monitors, a suspended bag of piss, a tube running from her nose. Her eyes shift toward us, and she says, "I hear you standing there. I hear you. Would you be a dear and help me get my clothes on? I need my pants and my shirt. I want to get dressed. I want to get dressed and go home. Why don't you get me dressed and take me home? I need to put my clothes on. I need to go home." Sandy says nothing, and I start to feel rude just standing there, so I say, "Hello, ma'am. It's Henry. Sandy's friend from next door?" "Please," she says. "Please, I need a little help. I need to get dressed and go home. Please," she says. I try to think of a response, but nothing comes. "I don't belong here," she says. "I need to go home, please. I just want to get dressed and go home." She begins to sob. Sandy walks her to her bed and pushes a button. "This will help you sleep." She tries to reach out to Sandy, but her hand is caught in a web of tape and tubing. "Get me out of here," she says. "Get me out of here." Sandy kisses her on the forehead, walks away and turns off her light, ushers me out and closes the door. "How long has she been like this?" I ask Sandy as we walk back down the hall. "You know what her problem is?" "She's dying," I say. Sandy places his hand on my back. I can feel his fingers sinking into me. "Her problem is she's already dead, but she just won't admit it. Look at me. I've been dead for years now. The dead, we've got it easy. We've got it easy as pie, cousin." "Easy as pie," I whisper, and my tongue rolls right out of my mouth. He takes me to the front door, tells me goodbye. I ease down the steps to the awaiting Mortimer. He wastes no time. He goes for my legs, and I let him take them. I think of my wife and my boss and of Sandy's mom, and as the dog unburdens me of my constituent parts one by one, I realize that Sandy's right. This is easy. I slowly pull into the warm embrace of the lawn, Mortimer snuffling happily beside me as he gnaws and paws at my femur, and take comfort in the fact that in this way I am treasured, made useful, enjoyed.